Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel Grand Masika Reaction, and today we are watching a professor who is condemning the black lives and he tells us about how blacks were, were used with whites by slave. Enjoy and remember to watch until the end, and we shall meet on the commentary.
And what is the value gap? The value gap is principally the belief that white people matter more in this country than others. And until we understand that, until we wrap our minds around that, and I say this as someone who, look, I'm a country boy who's made it big. I teach at Princeton. I got an endowed chair. I drive a nice car. Got a nice suit. Right? But I still want to hold the view that the value gap continues to distort and disfigure democracy in this country. With the phrase white supremacy conjures up images of bad men in hooded robes who believe in white power, burning crosses and screaming the word nigger. Right? But that's not quite what I mean by that phrase, right? On a broader level, white supremacy involves the way a society organizes itself and what and whom it chooses to value. Apartheid in South Africa, the Jim Crow South, and Nazi Germany are clear examples of societies organized by white supremacy. And in each case, the belief that white people are valued more than non-white people shaped every aspect of social and political life. It determined where you live, which schools you attended, and what jobs were available to you, and reminded you daily of your status and station in life. And that's what white supremacy is without all the bluster. It is a set of practices informed by the fundamental belief that white people are valued more than others. Now, in no way do we live in a society like Nazi Germany or apartheid South Africa, but we do live in a country where everyday black people confront the damning reality that we are less valued. What does it mean for those kids? I went to Ferguson. Y'all all right? I went to Ferguson to interview those kids. And I went to the Canfield Apartments. And if any of you have been in an apartment complex and you've seen the roads that go through them, you know how wide they are. Literally, you could, where you're sitting, the back door of somebody's house was. And that's where Michael Brown's body was, with bullets in his head. So imagine 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 6-year-olds walking around that neighborhood with that body there. We talk about that happening in Haiti. That's a community being terrorized. No matter what you think about what Michael Brown did, what does that mean? What does it say? We know the data is very clear. African Americans suffer chronic double-digit unemployment. We lead the nation in rates of heart disease, cancer, HIV/AIDS. Nearly 1 million of the 2.4 million Americans in prison are black. When we think about the differences between white and blacks in high school and college, and graduation rates and mortality rates and access to health care and levels of wealth and salary differences with comparable education and childhood poverty rates, we can see that in this country, white people, particularly those with money, matter more than others. And what's more, it has been this way since the day the country was founded. So I call it the value gap. And it's in our DNA. And every crucial moment, and this is what Democracy in Black is all about, trying to parse this in this current moment. A moment that's defined by the ascendance of the first man to the White House and all of this devastation in our communities. At every crucial moment in our nation's history, when fundamental changes in how we've dealt with race have occurred, the notion of the value gap has reasserted itself and limited the scope of change. Think about it. The powerful ideals of the American Revolution, which challenged the authority of monarchs and insisted on the principles of freedom and equality in the context of democratic institutions, those ideals were reconciled with the institution of racial slavery. At the very moment in which we were articulating freedom, there were slaves in Massachusetts petitioning the legislature in the name of the same principles for freedom. People could talk of freedom and liberty and hold black slaves. Even the first Immigration and Naturalization Act in 1790 allowed only white persons to attain citizenship. And that racial understanding of citizenship persisted until 1954. The brutal war to end slavery and the efforts during Reconstruction to imagine a genuine multiracial democracy were tossed aside. Jim Crow took over the South. White supremacy shaped our foreign policy in places like the Philippines and Cuba, and convict leasing emerged as another form of slavery. Cries for law and order and of reverse racism echoed throughout the nation as black folks marched in the streets, organized in their communities, and forced the government to end Jim Crow and to embrace, at least in principle, the idea of full racial equality. At every moment of advance, there's a reassertion of the value gap. And here we are today. The historic election of Barack Obama occasioned the vitriol of the Tea Party. Urgent efforts to change voting laws in ways that threaten black voters, and the worry that whites are fast becoming a politically incorrect minority. Each of these moments of racial progress represents a profound change in the country. America was and is truly different because these events happen. Right? I'm not trying to say everything is the same. Right? We've advanced, we've made progress. But the extent of the change has always been limited by the underlying belief that some people are valued more than others, and that belief being adjusted and adapted to new conditions. Niggas become Negroes. I'm saying the N-word. It's like, how can I say it? It's like folk trying to redact the N-word from Huckleberry Finn. Does that make any sense? It makes no sense. Or trying to say slaves were workers. It makes no sense to me. Blatant racism became demands for states' rights, and whites became one ethnic group among many. Black people, according to these new stories, were now dependent on government handouts and affirmative action, lacking individual initiative and self-reliance. Mass incarceration became the answer to calls for law and order. With each step forward, equally powerful forces pulled the nation back in the direction of the status quo. And this is what I mean. This is what I think people mean when they say things haven't changed. They don't mean that, we're just like, it's just like it was in 1960 or 1860. Right? Folks know that's not true. My dad couldn't go to Princeton. Right? Now I'm a professor at Princeton. I mean, I would be silly to say things haven't changed, right? But what hasn't changed, right, is the value gap. What hasn't changed is the value gap. I'm going to make a transition really quickly, and I'm going to open it up for some conversation. Is that good? Is that okay? It's that black preacher in me. Americans like to believe that we live in a special country, that the American Revolution introduced democracy to the modern world, and that we are free to pursue our dreams in a religiously tolerant society without the burden of rigid class distinctions. In the United States, people can worship wherever they want to, or they can choose not to believe in God at all. Lords and knights don't exist here. And poor people, if they work hard, can escape poverty and even become rich. The amazing bounty of our lands and natural resources, according to that story, also set us apart. It's as if God placed his hands only on us. As the patriots of the revolution put it, quote, "With the revolution, God has shown that the United States of America are his vineyard, the principal seat of his glorious kingdom," end quote. So in this view, America is an exceptional place, a chosen nation charged to redeem the world. But to believe this requires that we ignore our history. Even as America was imagined as a new Israel, many black people saw it as Egypt, a democracy with black slaves. With the abolition of slavery, black people found themselves relegated to second-class status as the country continued to exploit their labor. Over and over again, the American idea that ours was a nation committed to liberty, freedom, and the unfettered pursuit of individual dreams ran up against the stark reality that black people were valued less than others, and that our society was organized to reflect that fact. And then we tell a story, in effect, that follows from that. I'm going to pull up from the fan of Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I always attribute it to Emerson, but there's this wonderful line where Emerson said, God speaks to us through our imaginations. And I always talk to my students like this. I said, God speaks to us through our imaginations. And then I say, if that's true, then what's the devil doing? There's something about this current moment. There's something about this current moment where our imaginations have been arrested, where folks seem to want to insist that our only options, politically, existentially, are those right in front of us. And part of the work of tilling the soil, of opening up possibility, is creating the conditions under which we can see beyond the now. That's how I define the prophetic. Right? Creating the conditions where we can see beyond the opacity of our current circumstances. And I learned that actually coming out of the tradition of those of us who are the inheritors of the legacy of slavery. How did these people, under those conditions, imagine tomorrow, given the darkness of now? And so, Emerson, Singing America, Whitman answering, this grand tradition of democratic letters. And yet we find ourselves in a moment where greed, selfishness, ugliness, evil dominates. And this is particularly so for Black America. I want to begin with a passage from Martin Luther King Jr. I quoted at the very beginning of the book on page 5. And it comes from, where do we go from here? Right, we tell a story that it kind of gets rooted in Gernot Myrdal's The American Dilemma, that in light of that understanding of who we are, what's really at stake is a gap between our ideals and our practices. Right? And it's all we need to do is align the two. And what that formulation does, it's a built-in justification that wherever evil is, it doesn't say anything about our inherent goodness. Oh yeah, we used to have slaves, but now we don't. See, that's evidence that we're perfect union. Oh, women didn't vote. Yes, we know, but now they do. Evidence that we are on our way to a more perfect union. The narrative of American exceptionalism works in such a way that it keeps us from confronting the ugliness of who we are. Because we like to believe that the ugliness of the value gap is really reducible to ugly people, bad people, and it's usually the South. If only those ignorant Southerners, and I said ignorant, if only those backward Southerners would have behaved better, when we know that's not the truth. When we know that's not the truth. And so part of what the book tries to do is to what? Undermine this notion of American exceptionalism, because I'm an avid fan. My muse is James Baldwin. And Baldwin says in Fire Next Time that we never believed the myth that America was this shining city on the hill. That we were the most virile, that we treated Mexico honestly. Right? We never believed that lie. And so there's something about the particularity of our experiences that gives us insight into the fragility of this democratic project that allows us to bear witness to a radical democratic vision coming out of our particular suffering. And we need to do that today. When we think, I got to stay at the mic. I want to do my teacher thing. Reggie knows about this, right? When we think of democracy as just simply the gap between our ideals and our practices, as opposed to something that's constitutive of who we are, which keeps us from reimagining, right, what this place could be. We tend to look for the bad people, the loud racists. I tell the story in the book. I said this on Diane Reham's show, I think. My dad was the second black man hired at the post office in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And Pascagoula is the place where Trent Lott's from. And it's the place where, I love to say this, it's the place where William Faulkner honeymooned. Since Faulkner's one of my favorite authors, right? And so we moved. He knew he had precocious kids, so we moved from one side of town to the other. So it's on a hill, Briarwood Circle on a hill, nice 2-story home, middle class existence. That's why I hate the fact that some folks are trying to destroy the post office, right? Because I grew up a middle class life because my dad worked at the post office, right? And so as we're moving in, the police officers cruising by, and my dad gets his keys and say, yeah, I own it. And so I'm outside playing with my Tonka truck. I'm about 8 years old. And remember those old Tonka trucks? If you hit your hand, it would hurt, right? But I'm out there playing with my Tonka truck, putting the dirt in. And all of a sudden I hear, stop playing with that nigger. And it was the first time I'd ever been called that. And in the book I grab my truck and I look at the kid in his eyes and he looks at me and then I run inside. And I tell my dad, and my dad is a unique black man, right? Just put it this way, when kids in the back of the house shot out the back window with a pellet gun, my dad responded with a 12-gauge shotgun and blew off a limb of their oak tree and said, shoot back here again, right? So I tell him this, and he just looks, and you could see his past engulf, just flooding, just coming down on him, and he runs outside. Now, typically, we tell the story of American racism at that moment. An innocent child is wounded by an adult saying something as mean and as ugly as that, and that child has to spend his or her life working diligently to prove that he or she is not that, right? James Baldwin says, whatever the Negro problem is, the Negro problem is trying to raise a child in a context in which a world despises them, to keep them from despising themselves. That's how we typically think of racism. But the interesting thing about this is that I knew at the age of 8 that we were moving from the black side of town to the white side. Before I even got called the N-word, I knew we were moving from the black side to the white side. Why? Because in our old neighborhood, when it rained, the neighborhood flooded because we had bad sewage pipes. I knew we were moving from one side to the other because our sidewalks weren't paved. I fashioned myself a baseball player even when I was 8. Our baseball diamond, the grass wasn't cut regularly. The houses weren't as good. The schools weren't as good. Everything about my lived environment told me that somehow I was less valued. But we want to talk about that man who called the child the N-word. But we don't want to talk about the choices that were being made daily by those who are not committed to racism at all. But the choices that were made and are being made that reproduce the lived environment that made the value gap, that gave the value gap life. Racial habits. Racial habits. Right? I don't talk about unconscious bias. That's too hard. It's in your head. I don't know how to get at that. But habits are social. Right? So if we change our social arrangements, our political arrangements, right, we can get at those habits that reproduce the value gap. So we got to close the value gap. But in order to close the value gap, we got to speak to our fears. We got to speak to our fears. Right? I done left the text. Fears that somehow black folk are just criminals by definition. Fears, right, that black folk are these leeches, right, who only want a handout. I do an interview I talk about these interviews from a sociologist out of Rutgers. She interviewed these guys from New Jersey and Tennessee, and one guy from Jersey says, these black folk, I'm sorry, they're just lazy. They just want folk to give them stuff. They just want a handout. I worked hard, and in the interview said, so did you earn? I worked hard for everything I earned. Turns out his father was in the union. And so she's talking about social networks and how social networks reproduce inequality. Another guy says they're just lazy. They don't want anything. Turns out his friend gave him the test with the answers. So how opportunities are naturalized as hard work, individual initiative under one circumstance, and the lack of opportunity is read as what? Failure. Failure, right? How do we get at these fears? that somehow racial equality is a zero-sum game, that if we actually reach for it, you got to lose something to give to people who are undeserving. Not only is white fear doing this kind of work, and I'm playing on de Tocqueville's notion of fear and how it distorts democracy. But what's interesting, and I'm going to try to bring it to a close, what's interesting is that my fear of triggering your fear constrains my political behavior. I don't want to talk about black suffering because I'm afraid of a backlash. Oh, Obama can't do that because da 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 da. Oh, you can't say that because of da 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 da. And it's just, I mean, every time I hear it, you just kind of, what is being said here? What is being noted here? That something underneath our society is such that we can't speak to the suffering without somehow fearing that we're going to trigger white racism. Ann Coulter and folks, oh, I can't stand Ann Coulter's not too bright in my view. And I say that not because I disagree with her. I just, anyway. It constrains our political behavior. There's a line that I use in the book, and it's one of my favorite quotes from Malcolm X. I'm going to say it in Politics and Prose on film. And he says, stop sweet talking. Tell them what kind of hell you've been catching. And let them know if they're not ready to clean up their house. They shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down. Now, I'm not trying to burn anybody's house down. But the frank speech, we're in a moment where the crisis is such. The crisis is such that we're losing generations. I don't know how we're going to get out of it. The only thing I think we have to do is that we have to have a strategy in the streets, a strategy for the ballot box, and a strategy in the courtroom. And so what I call for is a revolution of value. It's my re-invocation of what Dr. King calls for in Where Do We Go From Here? In response to militarism, materialism, and white supremacy, Dr. King says we need a revolution of value, right? And my understanding of that is that we need to change how we view government. This story that big government is bad, I think is wrong, right? The government has a role to play, right, in ensuring the ideals that define our collective union, our collective aspirations. I think we need to change how we view black people. But in order to change how we view black people, we got to change how we view white people, right? There has to be an active and critical engagement with the idea of whiteness and what it accrues. And then lastly, we're going to have to change what ultimately matters. And here I think Occupy is right on. Right? We have to challenge at the heart an economic system that believes that there are people who are disposable. Right? So what Democracy in Black is all about is a re-invocation, right, under present conditions of a tradition that has always been, right, about this question of democratic life. And what is Democracy in Black? It's the efforts and actions of black people along with others to make real the idea that this is a country of the people, for the people, and by the people. And the way we do that is by challenging the very notion of who the people actually are, by resisting the idea that this is a white nation in the vein of Europe, by making us uncomfortable, by putting our bodies on the line. So I go and talk to the kids in Ferguson. I go talk to BYP 100. I go talk to the folks in North Carolina who've been organizing, struggling. How will we change our politics? Right? Well, the first thing, going back to the beginning, that we have to do is to unlock our imaginations. We have to see what the devil has been up to. Right? We have to open ourselves up to the possibility of a new way of being in the world. Oh, it's a romantic notion, right? That we can be better. But we have to look the ugliness of who we are squarely in the face if that is to happen. So let's have a conversation. Is that good? Is that all right? Oh, I know I didn't call. I'm going to get in trouble.
We got a question. Mike.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
I'd like to thank you for your efforts in the book to remind us of this journey that we have. But I think of Jesse Jackson, who said that we African Americans are living with the illusion of inclusion. And then I read the book Two Nations, Black and White, Hostile, Unequal, and Separate by Andrew Hacker.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that African Americans are in denial about these two nations. And it seems to me, so long as we're in denial, we're going to trip up every time because we're assuming that this thing is okay, but it's not. So it seems to me, don't you think we should be teaching our children this idea of two nations and what it means so that our children will know how to confront these types of actions when they encounter it? And hopefully they won't be as stressful as many of us are now, because we don't realize that this thing is on 24/7 and that the majority is reproducing generations that would continue racism for decades to come.
Right.
Okay?
Well, so what I'm trying to do, and thank you for your question, I don't believe that the idea of, or the reality that there are in fact two nations. In fact, that might be, it might even be more problematic than that if we were to take in terms of privileges, but in terms of class, in terms of what, this neoliberal iteration of capitalism has done, right, to the most vulnerable in this country. So I want to concede the initial move. How I understand it, though, is not to think of it as that which will be and forever will be. That it can actually be changed by our actions, but we just have to offer an honest description of it. So I'm trying to get to your point. So what I do with the value gap, right, is try to describe how that very world is produced, right? And so if we understand the value gap as the belief that white people matter more than others, and that belief isn't reducible to actual acts of prejudice. That belief is evidenced in our social arrangements, our political arrangements, and our economic realities. So then we can understand it as it works, and then we have to figure out how we're going to close it. Right? So if we understand how the value gap organizes our social world, right, we can then socialize our children in such a way that they can mobilize efforts to respond to it, right? As opposed to just simply assume that it's oxygen, that they have no agency in relation to it. This is what disturbs me about the Coates book, right? There's a way in which Ta-Nehisi describes white supremacy that you don't know how to muster the resources to respond to it, right? Because it's not, it doesn't just seem to be a practice. It functions almost like an ontological fact. It's like air, right? And I don't want that, right? I don't want that because so when Ta-Nehisi confronts his son, right, after the non-indictment of Darren Wilson, right, he just tries to give him the resources. Well, you just got to struggle and keep questioning. My son's at Brown, right? I'm a Morehouse man, and he just wouldn't look at Morehouse. He's at Brown. On the day I got a phone call, I tell this story in the book, and I'm going to be much quicker with the answers. I got that look. You said, that glare. I got to tell this story though. On the day that on the day I was elected the president of the American Academy of Religion, the largest body of scholars of religion in the world, I received a call from my son. So he was doing an assignment for his urban studies class in a rich park, in a rich neighborhood, white neighborhood in Providence. Police cruiser drives by, looks at him, hits a U-turn, pulls up on the side of the road, on the side of the sidewalk, clicks the lights, gets out, hits him in the face with the flashlight, hits him in the feet, looks at the bushes, and my son says, "Officer, can I help you?" The officer says, "Who are you and why are you here?" That's all he said. "Who are you and why are you here?" This is what he's telling me on the phone. And he says, "I'm a Brown student and I'm doing an assignment." And the officer said, "Well, the park closes at 9:00. And my son says, well, it's only, "Yes, sir, I know. It's only 7:30. And as he says that, the officer's partner comes around the cruiser with his hand on his weapon. And they both lean into him and say, "The park closes at 9:00. So my son puts his hands up, taps his girlfriend and says, "Officer, we don't want any trouble." And he leaves. That's my only child. Now, in that moment, if white supremacy is oxygen, if it's like air, what do I do? So I said, no, I'm angry because I could have lost my baby. It's my only child. And I said, because I didn't want it to go inward, I wanted to figure out how could it go outward. And so I said to him, imagine if you lived in a different zip code, how often that would happen. Trying to get him to begin to see that moment, right, in the context of structural realities that reproduce the encounter. Does that make sense? So part of what the value gap is all about is how we orient ourselves to changing the very world that you've just described. And I'll be much briefer moving forward. You know I'm not telling the truth.
Is this microphone on?
We can hear you. Just talk.
Okay. My name is Virgil Young. I'm from Washington, D.C. Been coming here for over 25 years. This is the best presentation I've ever been. My wife's a librarian. She brought me here. You knocked it out the park.
Thank you.
I'm buying a book. Quick background on myself. I'm a disabled vet, airborne paratrooper, tank platoon leader. Airborne paratrooper, 2 master's degrees, cancer survivor, and I've actually met a Ku Klux Klan person in Fort Knox, Kentucky. So
Right.
that goes to your police thing. So the idea, though, is that it's not just white people who give black people a hard time. It's the white supremacy. I've been discriminated by Nigerians, Asians, Indians, other blacks. That's the part of the value gap, is the permeation of the white supremacy and how other groups perceive, particularly African American males.
And how African Americans perceive African Americans.
Yeah, African Americans, exactly. So, the way we can solve that is focus on behavior, create brand new organizations that focus on behavior, not categories of people. Like, for example, the mayor of New York, I don't even know how to.
De Blasio.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, here's a gentleman who obviously doesn't care about color. He's focused on behavior. So regardless of what color you are, what are you exhibiting functional behavior or dysfunctional behavior? Okay, Donald Trump is very rich, but he's exhibiting dysfunctional behavior. You can have a homeless person who helps another homeless person,
Right.
and that person can exhibit functional behavior. So you can have a whole continuum of people in different stations of life, and they can either exhibit functional behavior or dysfunctional. We need a society that reinforces functional behavior, whether you're rich or poor. Get those people together. And we need to create organizations that deliver new products like good managers that aren't evil, that don't give. Everybody in here has worked for an asshole, okay? So, boy, wouldn't it be nice to have a manager that was a nice person, that cared about you, get professional development, get a pool of great managers, and then say, hey, look what we have here. So we need to build new organizations based on functional behavior.
Thank you so much. I think there's an emphasis on decency. Right. If we can just have some decent, good human beings. I don't want to say Americans are evil, right? But I do want to ask the question, given all the suffering and the willful blindness that we exhibit in relation to that suffering? Are we fast becoming a nation of monsters? But I do want to say it's not just simply individual behavior. As you rightly note, it's also structures. Right? It's also structures. But that's a longer conversation. Yes.
Professor, thank you so very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I know it's in the water in Flint, but what was in the water in Pascagoula? I
water
think
was
that what you
dark.
said is very marvelous, but I have a problem with what you're saying.
Sure.
And it is. It seems to me that if we really look at things carefully, white America is in great denial and practices deceit. How do people who practice deceit confront themselves in the way that you're talking about when fear is so prevalent?
Yeah.
That's what I hear in the Donald Trump people. Those are fear people.
Yeah.
You know, they're people who really don't have the ability to look at themselves honestly, but they perpetuate myths and they engage in denial. I don't know what you're talking about, brother.
No, I hear you. That's real. That's real, and we have to make that known. You know, what was in the water in Pascagoula? You know, Mississippi is a metaphor for America, Richard Wright said. How can I put this? I tell my students all the time that when we normalize nonviolence as a response to white supremacy, we lose sight of the miracle of his invocation. And one of the great scandals, and Baldwin said this, one of the great scandals of black life is something that we often fail to admit, and that is that for the most part, a lot of black folk don't like white people. And we have a reason not to. We're very skeptical. As Baldwin say, why should I risk my life that you're going to be human today? And so I'm trying to give an account of that, of the what you voiced. But when I was on the Diane Rehm show, just a couple of days ago, there's a brother who called in from South Alabama. And I figured he was probably from Grand Bay or Mobile, because I grew up on that I-10 corridor. And he said that he was part of forced busing, and that he encountered, and he's a white Southerner, and that he encountered a side of town that he didn't know even existed. And what he began to what he gave voice to in light of that experience gave me hope. Baldwin says at the end of Fire Next Time, it is the relatively few of us, the relatively few conscious blacks and whites, who must, like lovers, work hard to achieve our country. He's not saying it has to be all of us, right? It could be us in this room. Us in this room, and we can do the work. But to me, I have to have that faith. Otherwise, I'm going to drink too much Jameson. I got to have that faith. It is my undying and unflinching faith in our capacity to be better that gives me hope. But I'm not naive. I get a line from Du Bois's Souls of Black Folk of the Passing of the Firstborn. It is a hope not hopeless, but unhopeful. Right? We got to do the work. We got to do the work. Yes.
Thanks for doing this again.
And that wasn't even an answer. You see me dipping and dodging. Well, go ahead.
I'm an ex-lawyer, corporate law, New York, the whole thing.
Yeah, we follow each other on Twitter.
who left the practice of law in part because of what you talk about, the value gap. And I'm sorry, this is not too tall or something.
You got to stick your
Got
lips
it.
on it.
Got it.
There you go.
And so I'm a blogger now. I'm a novelist. I wrote a book that I'm trying to get published now. But as a 30-year student in law school, we sat around and talked about what this moment would mean. We were 30-year law students when Barack Obama was elected president.
Right.
And the majority of my friends were extremely optimistic about the ability of this moment to transform our country. And I was the one guy in the room saying, well, wait a minute, have you guys forgotten your history? And what I said at the time was that this moment will be defined based on what we do next. And by next, I meant in 2010. And if you look at what happened, I actually went down and worked on a U.S. Senate race because I wanted to test a thesis. What did this moment mean? And I thought that it would be defined by what we did next. And what you find is the power of learned helplessness that is if you hit a dog enough times, they're going to stop coming back. You have to, at some point, understand that people are just sick and tired of being told no, or that you can't do this, or your actions won't matter. And in 2010, we found that black folks who just come off of voting in record numbers just went back to business.
Right.
And they kind of bought back into kind of the status quo's interpretation and narrative about what it means to be black in this country. And so I guess 8 years later, we have that lesson. I guess the question I focus on, you focus more on kind of, I guess, changing hearts and minds. And I guess my question is, or my focus is more on taking action ourselves, right?
No, absolutely.
By voting.
Right.
It's very simple, but how do you get people to do that, right? I mean, it's such a simple concept, right? If you vote, you can change the Congress, right? Barack Obama didn't do much because he didn't have any help. He doesn't make the laws, he enforces the laws. How do you get folks to A, understand that, and 2, get up and vote? Because that's the thing that actually will change things.
So thank you so much for that question. It's a beautiful question, right on. And let me just say that the book is not just simply about changing hearts and minds. No. I have not a sentimental bone in my body. At least this is what my wife tells me. So I'm not a sentimentalist in that regard. Actually, I think you're absolutely right. I think ever since Seattle with WTO, right, there's been organizing going on in the United States that gives me hope. So there's Seattle, WTO, there's the anti-Iraq movement, right? And of course, that organizing, the object of it became Obama in 2008. He jumped in it, right? And all of that organizing that was preceding him, he became the object of it. So when he got elected, folk didn't know what to do. They got demobilized. And then all of a sudden we get Occupy, right? That energy shows up again. And then Occupy, Zuccotti Park, right? And then Black Lives Matter, right? So there's organizing going on the ground in very interesting ways. And politicians have been trying to navigate it, figure it out, at least on the left, right? Obama, I don't want to say he deployed that energy in particular sorts of ways that has now, that energy has figured out his limitations. I'm being trying to walk around some things, right? And so now what we see is organizing at the local and state level that's going to really have a fundamental impact, right? Bernie Sanders' campaign isn't something that just showed up, even though the mainstream media will let us believe that it is, right? This is Occupy energy. This is grassroots organizing energy. I just don't want us to get caught up in the 4-year election cycle or the 2-year election cycle, right? So in the book, I actually suggest something very controversial. And I wrote it at the moment in which I thought it was going to be Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, right? But I want to speak to your, because I'm saying we need a strategy for the streets, a strategy for the courtroom, and a strategy for the ballot box. We have to change our orientation to the vote, right? Voting is not just simply an act of piety. People died for it, so you got to go, right? And voting for African Americans has always been a kind of, how can I put it? We've participated in the democratic process in a distorted and disfigured way, right? Political scientists have described us as a captured electorate, right? Because what? We typically vote overwhelmingly Democratic. The Democratic Party specifically focuses on turning us out, getting us to the polls, right? And then they have no obligation to deliver policy. None.
For their candidate.
Their
candidate said, this is the guy we're going to have this year. Vote for this guy.
Vote for this guy, and then they get in, and we don't see anything. We get, oh no, I'm the president of all Black Americans. I'm the president of all Americans. We voted. We didn't ask you that. We voted for you at 95%. We're a constituency, right? We didn't ask you to be the president of Black America. That's not the question, right? So what does it mean? So part of what I call for is a blank out campaign. One of my favorite novelists is Jose Saramago. You got to read Jose Saramago if you haven't read it. Not just blindness, but seeing. The plot structure of Seeing is a major election takes place. There's a massive turnout. They count the ballots, and 80% of the ballots are blank. And they say, oh, what happened? So they run another election. The same thing happens. So what happens is that the voters use the democratic process to engage in a bloodless revolution. They say these choices aren't our choices. So what happens if Black folk turn out in historic numbers without Obama on the ballot? where all the grassroots organizing that's taking place, right, organizes around the election cycle to create what I call a civic power outage so that we can reboot our relationship to the democratic process. We turn out, right, in large numbers. This is long-winded, but I got to get this out. It's in the book. We turn out in large numbers, but we vote down ballot, right? Local, school board, city councils, the district attorneys, right? State legislatures, gubernatorial seats. But when it comes to the presidential ballot, we leave it blank. I don't know, that's scary, but we leave it blank. We leave it blank. And what does that do? Two things. One, it says to the Democratic Party, either you come serious or don't come at all. Two, it says to the black political class, you're not going to get GOTV money. That get out the vote money. You make your living delivering us like we're cattle chewing cud. We're going to disrupt how you function, right? And we begin to reimagine democratic politics beyond the 2-year, 4-year, election cycle. So this is a provocation. How do we change the game? How do we change? I'm not saying don't vote, because that's how it gets interpreted. That's not what I'm saying. How do we change the game, right? And then I say to my colleagues who ask me, well, are you ready for a Trump presidency or a Cruz presidency? And judges? Mm-hmm. And judges? And then I say, are white people ready for a Cruz presidency? Are white people ready for these judges? If you're not, then come correct around racial justice. You see what I mean? Why is the burden on these shoulders? It's dangerous. It's a provocation. I wrote it when I was drinking too much Jameson, but go ahead. Two more quick questions. I'm sorry.
Well, I hear you, and my wife, who's here, constantly chides me about the strategy that we had in 1968 not to vote for Humphrey or Nixon. I voted for Mickey Mouse, and the country got Richard Nixon. So I'm not sure about that particular strategy.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, and I'm constantly hearing it today, umpteen years later. Anyway, I'm glad that you mentioned Gunnar Myrdal, because you don't mention him in your suggested reading.
Yeah, my editor wouldn't let me.
Well, that was one of the most important books of social science in the 20th century. The American Dilemma, the Negro Problem in Modern Democracy.
Right.
Okay. Now, one of the things that Myrdal looked at, and you alluded to it, is the gap between American principles and American practices.
Right.
That's one of the things that that's one of the American principles and American practices, the gap. That's one of the things that Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement was able to play on, to get the United States to live up to her principles. Okay, now, you speak on page, if I might,
Just got
201 here.
What page?
201.
201?
Yeah.
I like this. Well, this is what, Reggie, you know about this, don't you?
And of course, Gunnar Myrdal also said that it wasn't a black problem, it was a white problem. Mm-hmm. You're saying the same thing, but the way you say it, if we are going to change how we see black people, white people, and only white people can do this, we'll have to kill the idea of white people. Do you really think white people are going to give up their privilege?
No. But the next sentence is, it is the precondition of America's release into a different democratic future. If we don't do this, we condemn ourselves to whatever tragedy awaits at the end of our current path. So part of what I'm trying to say is this, is that unless we close the value gap, uproot the racial habits, we're going to find ourselves right back here. Next generation. It's almost as if we're in the Matrix. We keep coming doing the same thing. Every generation, same thing. And so we have to create the conditions, and I think it's happening. It's happening in pockets. It's happening in pockets We have to create the conditions whereby that precondition can happen. And I think what Black Lives Matter is doing, I think what Forward Together, when I went down to Raleigh, North Carolina, and I saw what Reverend Barber was doing with the Forward Together movement and Moral Mondays, and you see that cross coalition, when those conservatives in when the conservatives in the Blue Mountains saw that they were closing rural hospitals, and how then they joined, right? When we begin to see that what this latest iteration of capitalism is doing is making working class white people vulnerable, Buckley's vision has won. William Buckley. William Buckley said when he debated James Baldwin, the problem in Mississippi is not that black people vote. The problem is that too many people vote. He had an issue with poor working white people. And it's a vision of conservatism that's vicious, right? In its understanding of working people, right? That's what obtains today. So we have openings. The contradictions are such. Oh, I'm revealing some politics here. The contradictions are such that there are openings whereby we can do this. We got one more question, two more, one more.
Three more.
Oh.
Three more. Four. Excuse me.
The one who gave me the gaze.
We'll be sure.
Okay, go ahead. Real quick. Why don't we get them all in and then I'll try to answer. Yes.
Very quickly, I just wanted to ask you if you have any words of encouragement for parents who are second generation of first or second generation college graduates who grew up as sharecroppers.
Yeah.
Some of the unintended consequences of integration is that it took away the tangible professionals out of the community so that young black children do not see people who gain legitimate success through education and through hard work. And I think one of the biggest bill of goods that is sold to our kids in the urban community and underserved communities is that their only means of legitimate success is through handling a ball or performing and entertaining.
Right.
And even myself, when I have a young 4-year-old child tell me, "Daddy, how come we're not white? I want to be white." She's already acknowledged the existence of the value gap at a tender age of 4.
Yeah.
And my son, who's 17 years old, who's far more studious than I ever was in high school, is the king of B pluses. He gets a 92.5 without doing a scientific study at a statistically significant rate. I'd be willing to bet you money.
Absolutely.
How do we reconnect and encourage these children and reach out to the kids on the street that I see walking with their pants down? And I think twice. I'm pretty fit. And I say, can I take this guy as he pack it? Can I outrun him before I approach him and say, "Hey, young man." Well, and I understand it. I get it. They want to be recognized. They want to be recognized as human beings for someone to pay them attention, to look them in the eye and acknowledge their humanity. So that's why they wear their pants down like that. What advice do you have?
Well, the first thing I would say is that we have to I talk about opportunity deserts. Opportunity deserts. And opportunity deserts are those spaces of hyper-concentrated poverty, right? Where dreams, you know, they're like Tupac. They're trying to get through, those roses are trying to get through cracks of concrete, right? And so those opportunity deserts are recent phenomena that we have to kind of understand the policy that has produced it, right? That's the first thing. Second thing, I wrote a piece in response to Justice Scalia's question in the Advocate in Time magazine. And many people were responding to the particulars of Scalia's claim. And I was saying to myself as I was writing this for Time, I was like, damn, it's damned if you do and damned if you don't, right? If you get to the Ivy League, they think that you should shut up and just be thankful you're there because you didn't really get there on your own. And if you don't get there, that's because you're not really constitutionally capable of getting there, right? So damn if you do, damn if you don't. And so I was trying to give my son advice, right? And I said, excellence is your armor. Excellence is your armor. To hell with Scalia. His world is dying, right? His world is dying. It's in the throes, right? So part of the advice that I would give is, right, and my son, he was a basketball player, Division I recruit, right? And he had 2 parents who chairs of African Americans. He didn't have a chance, but he was a B+ student, I mean, couldn't get him to make straight A's for, I would even try to bribe the dude, and he wouldn't do it. But there was something about excellence that we were trying to instill in him. There's a lot more I could say about it. Also about those sagging pants. All of y'all who critique them, I remember them hot mini skirts you used to wear. Be careful about how you critique style. I know that we got documented evidence about the style of the 70s, right? But so maybe we could talk afterwards. We got to get this one real quick.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, I wanted to say that Malcolm, Dr. King, and Asa Philip Randolph would be very proud of you.
Thank you.
Because you have distilled it all. And there's some others that I won't name. My question basically is a little bit different than the others. Do you think that the response, the very negative response to President Obama, would have been different in either way had he been what I call a middle passage descendant African American? Because he's actually a partial exotic immigrant when you think about him. In fact, some people called on, if you think about the shows, you could hear people thinking, certain people thinking, usually white people, but not only white people, saying, well, wait a minute, so he's not like those other Black Americans. Yeah, he he is not by his own admission. He's a Kenyan American. My wife is from Kenya, so I can talk about Kenya, and some other things.
Be careful.
Don't worry about it. It's covered. And also, don't you think, given that even post-Brown, what Brown versus Board did and all the activism, it still left the schools segregated in places like where I was born, South Carolina. And shouldn't we talk about getting resources? Shouldn't we return to or think about what Kwame Ture, what Stokely said when he said, we want a good school, not a white school?
Right. So I don't know how. I don't want to kind of imagine how people would have responded to President Obama if he had roots coming out of Mississippi, as opposed to his current genealogy. What I do know is that what I've said on record consistently since he was elected is that I wanted him to be bolder. I wanted him to be bolder, especially after the second year in office, when the Republicans took over Congress, and he realized what he was dealing with. Just go big and try to change the frame.
But I would argue that he is acting like an immigrant when he does that. You see, this is my whole point, that if you had been elected president, you would be doing what you're talking about. I didn't expect it from him because of precisely what his specific
as a thesis,
personal history was.
That's a thesis. And then we need to look, that's a thesis I have to think a little bit more about. And let's just be clear about the second point you made. Our schools are as segregated as they were in 1960. Period. And they're skimming off the top. The charter school movement is just the latest instance. I was on the board of TFA. I'll just be very clear. I was on the National Board for Teach for America. Right? I know I was in the inside. I saw it. Right? Can't go into it. I saw the ways in which TFA could easily, given its charge, its mission, which is really decent, could easily be folded into a broader effort to transfer public dollars to private hands. Public education is a source of big money, a site of big money. And in states like New Jersey, that big money is moving into private hands, and kids are being left in districts that are failing them day in and day out. So they're being tracked to particular segments of our economy. They are disposable. They are disposable folk. So, I mean, we can talk about that in a little bit more, but we got one more we can take? Sure. Two more.
Do I hear 3? Do I hear 4?
We got to sign. We do have to sign books, please. Yes, go ahead.
You talked about the role of the 3 branches of government and your wish that we would invest again in the idea of big government solutions. I wonder if it might not be the case that makes sense in terms of mobilizing Black America and other communities of color. But I think you are right on, and I think it does require some sentimentalism, if that's what it is, that white folks, it's both emotions and narratives about our country. And when you have to redo the narrative that you were raised on and your whole identity is wrapped up in it, there's huge emotional blocks to that. There's fear. You
Right.
talked about fear. There's shame. You know,
Yeah.
there's new research on like humans don't like feeling shame. We just
Right.
will avoid it. And if we have power, we will avoid places and arguments and politics that make us feel shame. So I'd like to see big government group therapy for white people. I don't know if we can legislate it, but we need it in order to deal with the emotions that require us to change the narrative and therefore to show up and vote in the way we're not going to vote until we've shifted the narratives and dealt with the emotional resistance
Right.
to shifting the narrative. So if you have ideas on how,
You know, quickly, because I know we have some other folks, quickly, the best example I can give you is what's going on in North Carolina. What Reverend Barber is doing, he has a new book. I don't know if you guys have it. He has a new book that came out called Third Reconstruction. Came out January 12th, where he describes what he's been doing. And what we see, right, is a narrative shift around the demand, because we change our view of government by changing our demand of government. What we ask, what we seek, what we expect. And they're doing it. So we have examples. So I don't have to come up with it. We have examples. And it's right here. So we'll see. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for this important book. I'm worried right now. I wonder what you
Could
thought.
you bring it down for her?
What?
Yes, ma'am.
Oops.
Be careful.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm worried about corporate power and big money.
Yeah.
It's to their interest to finance demagogues and to play on the fears, especially of the lower middle class white people who have lost also. And I just wondered what.
No, I think first of all, you just spoke truth. You know, you just spoke truth. When I was watching the Democratic debate, I'm not a Sanders guy, but I was like, oh shit. Excuse my language. Right? He just called Goldman Sachs out like that. Wow. Right? And she got $600K a year for talking. Right? And he's talking about, this is not really a difference of opinion. This is just a reflection of big money in politics. I mean, he was just saying it. Right? And part of what we see on the Republican side, part of what we see on the Democrat side, I just said Democrat, on the Democratic side, is that all of them want us to vote from a place of fear. All of them want us to vote from a place of fear. And what fear does is clouds our imagination. Fear clouds the imagination. It doesn't allow you to see. See the options right in front of you or see beyond those options. So they got us scared. Democrats say, look at them. And the Republicans are like, look at them. And folk are just trying to keep a roof over their heads and put food on their table and make sure that their children can live a better life. Well, I just heard on NPR, Oxfam just came out with a study. 62 people own what? As much as half of the wealth, more wealth than half of the people in the world. Hold up, let me say that again. 62 people own more money, have more wealth than half the people on the planet. That's evil. That's evil. I'm sorry. That's me as being melodramatic as I can be. That's evil. Yes.
You have a nice looking tie.
Thank you.
I think we wore the same suit.
It's that Morehouse man in me, Doc.
Hey, I felt like this today. I just got in to the city from Lynchburg. At the Donald Trump rally at Liberty University. Well, wait a minute.
Come on.
Wait a minute.
Come on.
Now, being that he's a capitalist and a Republican,
right?
My name is John Cheeks. I am writing the Reparations and Restitution Act for the District of Columbia to be placed on the ballot this year. I was recruited to do this,
right?
Not by African Americans, but by Anglos and Caucasians and the rest who are liberals, conservatives, and what's the other word? Independents and
Libertarians,
just a mix.
however we want to describe
Just a
it.
mix.
Right.
They want the act to go through, but by voting. They want us to have reparations and restitution. They want to end welfare. A lot of things they want to end within the Reparations and Restitution Act. They want to give money, housing, education, and also I had to interview some of these people to give me a list of injuries. I interviewed a Confederate son of the South right across the bridge in Arlington. He gave me a list of injuries. I went through a deep transformation. I am a descendant of a slave.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I am a black American, born and raised here in this country. My mindset had to be placed in a different way. He is a starch Democrat. He told me, he said every black person he sees championing their Democratic affiliation, he has to look at them and laugh. Okay, that's his report to me.
Right, I hear
the
you.
Democratic Party wrote rules and regulations and laws to keep black people in shackles and chains.
Right.
Okay, I had to also interview a descendant of a liberator of the North, Union, very proud Republican. Very proud. He thinks that the black race slapped the Republican Party in the face many times and have drank too much Kool-Aid with the Democrats. Okay?
Right.
This Reparations and Restitution Act that's being written right now, not all of us will like it. It's going to decriminalize child support. It's going to,
Just say it and just tell me what you got to tell me, and then we can. Just say it directly, and then we.
Are you in favor of reparations and restitution for descendants of slaves? We can't get it nationwide. We can only use it in the states that held slaves. California, Ohio, and a lot of the highly populated areas will not be, accepted in this law. Okay. Just from New England on down to Florida over to Texas.
I hear your question. Yeah, I got you.
And in the Mid-South.
Am I for reparations
and restitution?
So the uncomplicated answer is yes, but I want to.
Okay, guys, welcome back on the commentary. Hope you enjoyed the viewing and hope you got the message the black professor was trying to pass by. It's so sad to hear from a black man condemning this issue of racism. So it has become a major tragedy to this world since the 90s up to date. So guys, we just have to do away with the black, with the whites bullying the black. I just have to go through some of the key points that the professor was trying to pass around. That the ration of racism, black slavery, citizenship was allowed to the whites only. So this is he's trying to say that the racism, of course, the racism is the color, so the whites don't like the blacks. So he trying to say that the ratio of racism and the black slavery, of which all of us knows that in the past they were blacks were the only slavery, and they were the white slavery. So the whites used to come in Africa and take those blacks, not even in Africa, in those countries which we have those blacks. Eventually we have those blacks in America. So they are just America, but they are black American due to their color. So the whites took them and use them as slaves, as they are slaves of, like, they used to mistreat them when they work. And the professor was not happy with the idea. Then another thing, he stated that you see, once upon a time in America, Barack Obama tried to change the voting system in America. That what do we mean by the trying to change the voting system in America? He tried to inject to the whites that any black can do what a black can lead, and the blacks were so impressed with that move, so that, and they decided to vote for Barack Obama. So so as you can see, during the Obama time, there was that hatred. There was no that much love from the whites, since they used to ignore. Even if the Barack called up a meeting, you see, they see this man as a black, so they have that racism. They don't like the black color. But eventually Barack Obama tried his best. Another thing is that the blacks valuation has been lowered to an extent that they are given an image of a certain image of a devil. So you see that is a big mess. A big mess that, see, when they always see a black man or a black person, it just seems as an example of a devil, and that is not good at all. The professor condemned it very much. Then we see the black America go through a lot of racism, even when they visit a lot of white. Even if you visit a lot of white prison, have you ever wondered if you go in these white countries, like when you go in let's say a good example in America, a lot of black American are in prison. You can see, like, the life we're living right now. A black person can be charged wrongly due to his color or her color, simply because he's not a white, since the judgmentship is not given rightfully, like, or let us say equality. There is no that equality in the white, in the judgment of white and black. So when you go in a lot of prison, in major prisons in these up countries, like with the whites, you find a lot of black American, and they go through a lot, since they are seen that they are not belonging there. Then another thing, the blacks they were not given an opportunity. The blacks professor and others learn that to educate. So since the professor saw that, in the conjunction of the professor and the other activists, they came up with an idea that they must educate the blacks on their rights, since everyone has a right to be living in this continent of Earth. So for everyone have just to have that equality and have to be given that opportunity. Speaking of an opportunity, let's say, for example, if you go to America, you as a black, when you apply for a visa, and a white man apply for a visa, the visa can be late for the black America, but for the whites, it comes, due to the racism. But I think it's high time we come together, we come up with we stay awake, and as blacks, let's not be condemned by the past of the 90s and 80s. Let's live the present, and let's unite, and let's this thing of black racism ration to be done away. So I'll be going out for a while, so I'll have to know what's your opinion about this story, and what's your take Let's continue supporting the black, and remember one thing: Black life matters, and God bless the blacks.